In our previous Let Go and Lead episode, we introduced you to Scott Halford, a storytelling expert and neuroscience champion. Here in part 2, we'll hear more from Scott about the specific steps leaders can take to craft stories that inspire.
The hallmark of the leader is having the acumen of understanding your body, your biology, your chemistry, because when you say something, the ripple effect is huge.
That's Scott Halford, an internationally renowned keynote speaker, educator, and advisor. He works worldwide to educate audiences about emotional intelligence, the neuroscience of achievement, effective performance, and the success we create when we understand the intricacies of human interaction. Scott is the author of 2 best-selling books, Be a Shortcut, which is based on emotional intelligence and influence, and Activate Your Brain. Scott's been telling stories throughout his career, first as an Emmy award-winning writer and producer, and then as a professional speaker. He's recognized as a certified speaking professional by the National Speakers Association, and in 2014, they inducted him into their NSA Speaker Hall of Fame. He holds an executive master's degree from the Neuro Leadership Institute. In this first part of my conversation with Scott, he explains how the human brain is wired to be moved by stories and how leaders can harness that power.
I think if you, as a leader, give out a strategy and you can't tell a story behind every piece of it, then you probably haven't thought about it enough.
I'm Maril, MacDonald, and my passion is helping people and organizations navigate the human struggle of change. I believe that when we relinquish control, we open up amazing new possibilities. This podcast, Let Go and Lead, is about what happens when we loosen the reins. In it, I speak with business leaders, academics, and creative thinkers to hear about their career and life journeys and to gather what they've learned about change, transformation, and creativity along the way. Once again, Scott Halford. This is the very reason we're talking to you. I think our listeners are going to be so interested in this. We want to launch a new strategy or a shift in our strategy. What are some of the things we could do besides 200 PowerPoints with boxes and arrows? What do we really share with the audience to bring them along with us, and how do you do that?
It's a great question for a lot of different things. It applies to so much. If they get the nub of what your question's about, they're going to be able to apply it to so many different aspects of their own life and their own business because of this. When you, as a leader, if you can imagine yourself on a platform, whether it be Zoom or live on a stage, no matter what the platform is, you've got myriads of ears listening to you, lots of eyeballs watching you. There's nothing more powerful than that moment in time for you and your customers or your colleagues, because you have the opportunity to take and shape every one of them in that moment in one singular kind of way, at least very few kind of ways. And you get the power of the social proof of each other watching each other, of all of the people feeling something at the same time. It's kind of like if you put a cartoon up on a screen and it's a funny cartoon. And you keep on talking, and this cartoon's up behind you, and people are reading it. They're trying to listen to you, but they can't because we really can't split our attention. And then they're reading the cartoon, and the laughter begins. But it begins over here. There's a smattering over here, some in the back, some in the middle, some on the side. If you're doing a webcast, well, you don't know where that laughter is, and it feels incredibly flat. But what's happened is that you allowed that emotion to dissipate, which is what most leaders do when they put out a strategy. They just put it out there, and they hope, against all hopes, that every person listening will come to the same place as they will. That is a fool's mission, quite frankly, because they won't get to that same place. You're going to get dissension. You're going to get, but what if, but what about me? You're going to get all of those things. So instead, you put up the cartoon, and the moment that it comes up, you read the cartoon aloud to everyone listening. What happens in the room is that everyone listens and they hear the punchline at the exact same time. And so you get this huge laughter that happens, and it all happens at once. And now everybody is maybe not appreciating the joke, but they're appreciating each other because we like to laugh and we like people who we laugh with. And so laughter being the oxytocin, it's a bonder. Laughter creates that bonding. Well, you have to have it all at the same time. And that means that the leader needs to be in sync with his presentation. It means that she has to be able to keep together with the technical parts of the presentation. So there you are on your stage, and you have this moment in time where you want to bring everybody to that stage, if you will, and that at the same time, you're talking to them one-on-one. And to do it one-on-one, you don't start with your strategy. You start with where their heads are. And their heads are, where is he going? What is this going to be about? And how is this going to impact my life? And so if you start there, you might come out, and not even with any slides, you might come out all by your little lonesome and say, it's been a rough year, to say the least. I know for me, sitting in my sweats and talking to people via webcasts all day long, it's been hard. I've been doing 15 meetings a day, says the leader. And they go on and they kind of bring everybody into that. Yeah, I do that too. Oh, yeah, I do that too. And so the first thing is to bring everybody to your place. And in your strategy discussion, you literally want to, why did you even think about this? What is it that keeps you up? What makes you scared as a leader? And so that vulnerability begins to allow people to have a connection, as opposed to feeling like this is what they are going to do to us. So that's the first thing. And that connection is oxytocin. And oxytocin doesn't happen because you tell me that you need to feel good about this. It happens because I see that I want to feel good. I see it because I'm moved by you, because you've told me something that makes me think, wow, you're human too. Second thing is that before you even jump into the number, you have to get so high level in terms of what does the strategy mean to the company and what does the strategy mean to me as an individual? Does it mean more opportunity? Does it mean that we're going to be more excellent? Are we going to be prouder of who we are? What is it that we're going to be or est at? So now we have a direction. I want you to feel this way. When we're done, no matter what you look at in all these numbers, you're going to feel proud that this is the direction we're going.
Do you actually say that to the audience? When this is over, you'll feel proud? Or you're thinking that to yourself?
I see nothing wrong with projecting what you want. It's, laying out priming and placebo in the mind is really powerful. And that's what we're doing, is basically saying, my hope is, and I believe that you will, feel really proud of this company because of the hours that people have put into this. So again, you got to be careful not to be the hero of your story. You don't want to be the person who says, and you're going to be real proud of all the thinking I've put into this, right?
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to go down that path, but you do want to make it look like I've thought about this. It's kept me up at nights. I know that it's going to affect some of you in a way that you're going to wonder, will it be better? And I hope that as you listen and you take it in and you sit with it and think about it, that indeed you will find that it does affect you in a positive way, and you will be proud. And so you're putting it out there and you're giving people something to shoot for. And so that's what a leader's doing when they put out there to say, I think you're going to be proud. What I want you to listen for are the things that you know that you're going to impact. I think it's going to make you proud or happy or whatever emotion you want to put it out there. You're giving them the thing that you want them to listen for. And so that's where I think a lot of leaders fall off, is that they don't take into consideration, first off, how long they've spent with it. Secondly, the fact that it's going to impact the people who are listening to it. And some of them might feel negatively about it. And if you don't have a destination for them to go to, they're going to pick the one they want to, and it might not be where you want them to go. And then third, of course, the impact to the customer. And that is going to be surely reliant upon how the colleagues feel about it. So you create a high strategy and you look at it like a Steve Jobs. He's going to present a telephone with a radio in it, with TV in it, all at once. And nobody ever thought it could be done, right? So if he told you the technical aspects of that, you would be glazed over in a second. But if he tells you that we never thought we could achieve it, but in this tiny little, just larger than a credit card box, we have your entire world of computing, and it will be the thing that you compute with for the rest of your life, and it will become your best friend. But what I'm trying to say is that the detail, the spreadsheet, if I put a spreadsheet out in front of every person in an audience and said, here are the numbers, look at it and tell me what it says, you would come up with 50, 60, 100 different stories. But if I put a spreadsheet out in front of you and I say, here's the story that this attaches to, then the numbers in that spreadsheet start to pop out and the numbers begin to connect to where it is I'm going. And so we've basically curated for them the parts that we want them to. You've got to be careful that there's no deception or lying or what have you, but you do want to pull out the pieces and parts that are important. They can't understand the strategy at your level. Where frustration comes in is that it's like, well, they're not going to understand this because they don't have all the data. And that could be true. So we don't want to present things that will get muddy to them.
This is really interesting.
The hallmark of the leader, in my opinion today, is not just understanding business and financial, having that acumen, but having the acumen of understanding your body, your biology, your chemistry. Because when you say something, the ripple effect is huge. And you might not think it's worth anything, but you have just now taken your stock and either raised it or dropped it by a long shot, because your employees are attached to so many people and the ripple effect is real. It is real. And so working things to a nub and taking the time to even put more work into the presentation of that is critical. You only have one chance to make a first impression. You only have one chance for those people to feel the way you want them to feel. And once it gets out of the bag, you have no more ability to herd those kitties than anybody ever has. And you're in trouble if you haven't thought to that point about how is this going to be presented? How is it going to be laid out? What do we want these people to feel when I'm done? I have never heard an executive ask that question. They always ask, what do we want them to do when I'm done? Well, we want them to work really hard to get the stock price up, right? Kind of thing. Well, shoot, all this time, all I have been doing is working on your story, and I don't know really what it is. I don't know what the direction is. I need to be connected to it somehow. And that's what the stories do. It's important to create the connection. You can do it in a short amount of time. You could do it in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. The story should always begin with who's in it. And of course, if you're talking to your employees are a part of the story. And somewhere along the way, and that you have had to be, as the hero's journey, you have had to stumble and fall. And the ending of it might not be that you got into a place of winning gold medals or winning this or that. It may be that you are where you are right now. And that's all right, because you've surrounded yourself with people who keep on winning. And the lessons along the way are the keepers. It's not the fact that you are the big leader of some great company. It's the fact that you're with us struggling. You're an unfinished human being just like we are. And that I want to get on this with you because I want to help you. Everybody wants to be a part of making a success. So be careful not to pronounce the truth as a leader. That's what I always say. It's a dicey place to be when you say, boom, here's the truth.
And really what we're talking about is the most common mistakes that leaders make, right? Is they're telling stories.
Yeah, or the reason that they don't want to. And if you understand what roams around the professional speaking world is the idea that at any given time, your audience, 60% of the people in your audience are dealing with major life issues. Well, you have this major responsibility at this time to fill that time with not nonsense, but something that is worthy of and allows them to say, thank goodness there was work because it allowed me not to think about that. If you know that they're dealing with that difficulty, you better raise your game and get into something that makes them feel like, gosh, I'm excited about being here. So I think the strategy has to be delivered in a way that you do not have to overwhelm them with spreadsheets. You have to overwhelm them with feeling and with, this is going to be good. I might be a little bit hesitant, but I think this is going in the right direction.
So thinking about that, as a leader considers preparing to give a presentation to an audience, or a speechwriter's thinking about supporting their leader, what should they be aiming for in telling this story? How do you actually craft it?
The first thing that you want to do is, of course, figure out what is the point that you want your listener to walk away with. And so if you keep that one in mind, just put it on a big piece of paper and put it on the top of that paper and always keep coming back to that. And so it's called kind of like the fall line. I'm from Colorado and we ski. And when you ski, if you took a ball and you basically set it down the hill, the line that it would take is the fall line for that ball. How does it fall from beginning to end? What we know is that it starts at the top and it ends at the end. The story basically says, we want the audience, the listener, to take this away. And we're going to do it through this story. And it's going to go over here and to the left, to the right. It's going to take a jump over here, but it's going to end at the end with the objective that we want. The in-between is the story. And the in-between takes us on basically this journey to get to that place. And so what we want to do is we always want to, you've heard of the hero's journey. It follows that, but not in the 10-point format. We got to set the stage with where are we, who's involved, and who is going to be doing anything in this story. And the second thing we want to introduce then is what's the problem? What are we trying to solve? If you don't have an antagonist or something that actually causes the hero, if you will, to stumble and fall, there won't be any learning, because people typically don't learn anything until they do stumble and fall. And that's where we begin to find obstacles. And those obstacles are where you can begin to introduce things like that connection, that closeness. I stumbled, I fell, and this person came along and they helped me up. And the thing that I learned from them, and that's basically where we turn the corner on the hero's journey, by basically teaching what's the lesson, what's the point here. And you can do that in a very rapid fashion. You could do it in 30 seconds, or you can do it in 2 minutes. A story that's longer than a minute and a half, quite frankly, unless you're doing it for a living on a regular basis, you probably don't want to go any longer than that. If you look at the competition that Ernest Hemingway won years ago, this short story said this: baby shoes for sale, never used. And if you look at that, you go, woo, people, they bring in, brings a lot of imagery to your head. What do you think of when I say that story?
The baby died, right?
Yeah. For some people, it's just that the baby grew up, and that it grew so fast that it never had to use the shoes, or they got it from an uncle who didn't pay attention to the fact that babies are not babies anymore when they're 4. It's something like that. So the trajectory through a story is to figure out what the format is first. And then the format that I use is that hero's journey. That's the setting of the stage, who's in it, and then who's going to stumble and fall. It's typically you, the storyteller. It could be someone else, but something came along to get into the way to the success that they were trying to get to. And in that falling, in that stumble, in that obstacle, therein lies the opportunity to play with that oxytocin, the norepinephrine, and the dopamine, to get us to the place at the end where we wanted to be, or the lesson that was. And lots of different things that go into that. It's interesting. I think people think that a story is like, I went to the grocery store and I didn't have any money, and this person in the checkout line offered to take care of the rest. That's a fine story, right? It's a fine story, but there are so many things that you could do with that actually create a feeling that you want to create. And if your objective is to talk about that sometimes unexpected things happen that we never in a million years would, of course, expected, but that taught us about kind of how universally maybe that humankind is awesome. So I'm standing in the line. I was in a rush, and there was a woman in front of me, and it was the first time in a long time that I'd seen anyone write a check. And of course, that check would come out at the time that I needed to rush through the line. And she's writing it. She couldn't have been any younger than 75 years old. And she's writing it as slow as she possibly could. And I catch the eye of the clerk, and I say, kind of whisper aside, I ask, how much is it? And he says, it's $29. And I said, I'm going to take care of it. You let her know that someone in the line is going to take care of it. Don't tell her it's me. And then just get her on her way, because I've got this card that I need to get going. And so she gets the news, and she stands there and she looks around befuddled, and she doesn't know what to do, but this tear just drops out of her eye, and she's just so overwhelmed by the fact that somebody would do that. Now, everybody in the line who was right behind, they knew who it was, but the fact that she didn't know made all the difference in the world. Because sometimes we do things for people, not to be recognized for having done it, but being recognized in the universe, that things happen not because somebody's in a rush, but because they have to happen. It's what makes the world go round. And so I just made that whole thing up. So you could take a story and basically craft it in a way that creates a feeling. I could have taken it down the path of just telling the story as it was. I was late. I needed to get going. I paid for hers so that I could get her out of the way. Well, that doesn't, that would be probably the truth. The fact is a story being 75% accurate is what you want to go for.
Well, it's funny because I found myself wondering that as you were telling the story. Was this out of empathy for her, or was this expediency for you? So it's kind of interesting because it did have me thinking.
You could take the story 20 seconds longer and say, just imagine the conversation that went on around her dinner table that night with the people who she met, and what impact that had on her day. And if you were a leader and you were about making impact with your clients, just to say, what's a discussion that our clients are having about us at the dinner table? Because everything we do affects everything they say about us. And so you could take and create that payoff by just eliminating some things from the story, right?
So, and as you were telling the story, I found myself wondering what parts of the story is triggering which chemicals, and is it a one for one or is it a combination?
It's typically a combination. When you are, the beginning of the story is interest. Where's this guy going? Right. So it gets people to pay attention, especially if you draw them in. If you say things like what draws people in are things like, you've probably been there before. You stood standing behind somebody who is really, really old, and they take out a checkbook at the checkout and they begin to write the check. And you know that it's going to take about 5 minutes for them to even finish their signature on it. So you bring them there because they've all been there and they're going, oh, yeah, that's happened before. You might exaggerate the time a little bit because what it does is it allows you to later on expose the fact that you were in a rush. You being in a rush and imagining that the check's going to take 5 minutes long is congruent. You being in a rush and knowing that the check's going to be written in 10 seconds is not. So, you have to take and pull that in. The first thing is interest. The next thing would be then to begin to present the obstacle. The obstacle was my rush. The obstacle was getting this woman to understand that her groceries were being paid for. The obstacle would be that I have now begun a little metamorphosis in myself. If you notice, the story didn't really include me, except for one piece, and that was with the clerk. I was in a rush. With the clerk, I said I'd pay for it. And then from then on, it became about the people there. And that's where you have the opportunity to bring your audience in and say, this is you. You're going to be now this person. Every step of the story should include imagery that brings that person into that moment. And if they can't see themselves there and the story's too far away, if you're saying, one time when I climbed Mount Everest, your audience is like, how nice for you. You've climbed Mount Everest. I'm not going to even climb the foothills. They're not with you. Then it becomes wow, how nice for you. We have to create imagery that says, I've been there before. If they can say me too all along the way, then you're creating imagery that allows them to connect all the way to the story. The oxytocin that happened because this older woman shed a tear. And the story's not about me, because the moment that you make yourself the hero of the story is the moment that your audience is fixated on, wow, how nice for you. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
So we don't want the story to be about me. We want the story to be about the topic, about the objective, about the woman who, would be able to get us to that objective. And I didn't have an objective for that. So it's kind of, punting and making it up along the way. But you could make a story about that in a lot of different ways. Leaders, I think, they're charged with some difficult things. And that is, they think that they have to motivate people. And motivation is just such a weird construct because you can't see it in the brain, and it's something we guess at. And I don't know what you're motivated for. I don't know what anyone here is motivated for. I do know that we're inspired by big, chunky things. And you can inspire your people to reach their best. What is best for you is not best for me. We can inspire people to go the extra yard, but it might be an extra yard that requires me crawling, and you might be able to jump over it. It is really important that a leader understands their job is not to motivate people. It's to allow them to see that they have the opportunity to be a part of something that is going to be quintessentially the best. So I think we have two things going on. One is, what's your objective? And secondly, who are you, the person who's delivering the story? What kind of credibility do you have? And what are you trying to do? People will see through you in a second if it looks like you're just using nice platitudes and wonderful words that are stuck together that have motivated someone somewhere along the way. But now we're pulling them out of a generic pool, as opposed to going to the pool that we have, and that is the pool of our life, and pulling out stories that go, oh, that's it. That right there makes so much sense. That right there I connect to.
This is really interesting. One thing I'm wondering about is, so often I hear people tell their leaders, you need to tell stories about yourself for people to connect with you. And they recommend to the leader that they get up and tell their own personal stories. What do you think of that?
I think it's absolutely the best advice I could give. And the fact is that A few things happen when you begin to tell stories that are personal to you. First off, you have to realize again, keep this in mind, is that the story is, even though it's about you, the story is not about you. You're telling the story because you want your people to be inspired to do something. You want your people to actually jump on to a thought train that gets them kind of going in the same direction. If you look at your life, and there's an exercise that I'd encourage all to do. It's a really useful thing in my estimation. What I have people do is I call it mining your life, MINING, mining your life. And when you mine your life, you find stories that you never thought you would have. And you fall upon them in the strangest of ways because you will find the smallest trigger that actually creates a story. So you'd start, and on a sheet of paper, you'd write 0, right, for your birth, and then put the last number as your age. You might need 2 or 3 sheets if you're my age. And so you write down your numbers and you write down all the ages. And then what you do is you go back as far as you can in your memory. In that age, you would write down, a mnemonic device, something that just jogs your memory. You don't have to write out the whole story. Something like at 3 years old, on mine is 3 years old, sipping water out of the gutter after a rain. I might use it, I might not. It might be 6th grade, nared off my eyebrows. Right now, that's kind of fantastical because it's a big deal. People go like, "Well, I never did anything weird like that." You don't you don't have to do anything weird. You could say doing chores on Saturday. We all had chores on Saturday. Well, what was the big deal about that? And later on, you'd come back, but you'd mine your life for all of the years you can remember. Just write down as many big, huge things that you remember because they're going to have something in them that actually change the trajectory of your life. If you can't remember from 0 to whatever age you are, I encourage you to go back to the very first house you ever lived in and then close your eyes and imagine every room in the house and then write down whatever memory comes in the room in the house. And you would do that for every one of the houses that you lived in until now. And what pulls out again are these little, you're like, oh God, I remember when I broke that dish. Well, why was that important? Well, because it was a part of my mom's favorite china. And she was so careful with it, and I broke it. And from there is some kind of lesson, right? You have to figure out the lesson. So you go down, you write down the story, and then what you would do is write down what's the point? What do you think the point would be of that story? And then the next column you would write down, well, what would be the business point that I would make? Because in the end, if you're talking to a business group of people, you can't just tell a personal story to make them cry or laugh or what have you, because then it feels manipulative. If you are telling a story because it has this perfect kind of bow that it points to on the story, then you're in luck. You've got some really amazing kinds of things that you can issue forth. So that's one of the devices that I use is to go through and mine my life. And I do it constantly, even though I do for a profession, I speak for a profession. You would think people like, okay, well, you did that once. You don't do it. Hopefully you're keeping on living and you've got other stories. The thing that it all does is this, is when you begin to tell stories as a leader, you begin to pay attention to your world as if everything is a lesson. And if everything is a lesson, then it does become that indeed. And you have got a rich treasure trove of things to talk about. And that's when it really clicks. And you can pull it out of your back pocket while you're giving a talk. Just something will hit your brain and you'll say, oh, that reminds me of when, bam, 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 bam. You jump into it.
So, practically speaking, what are just some of the traps leaders need to avoid when they're telling a story?
That's a super good one because most of the traps are easily avoidable if you know what they are. Number one is that the length of the story needs to be relatively short. You could get a lot done in 30 seconds. You can do a lot of damage in 5. And I think that the shorter the story, the more impact it has. I think that the story has to be relevant to a business point. So telling a story just to tell a story because it was funny and you heard it at dinner is not a good reason to tell a story. A good reason to tell a story is that it is relevant to something that is impactful and that you want your audience to walk away with. And when I say audience, I mean an audience of 1 all the way up to millions. I think that, so brevity, I think that understanding that relevance is important. And I think that you have to find stories in which you are not the hero. And it can't be, well, when I won my 5 gold medals, it was hard, but I did it. And, it can't, that's just people are throwing up in their mouths. What you want to do is make sure that you find stories where you tripped and fallen. Maybe you didn't get to where you were going, You got to someplace else. And that someplace else you had never counted on, never thought of. And that has made the difference in your career and in your life. And so it's being open to the unknown. I think that the stories have to have some element of your learning in it. Don't be afraid that you are being vulnerable. They will not only see you as weaker, they will see you as a stronger person. Leaders are really afraid of showing their foibles. I think that is a foolish thing because we know that vulnerability creates a connection. Some people say it creates trust. I think it can actually hurt trust sometimes, depending on how vulnerable you are. But I think the biggest piece of vulnerable is that it creates a connection with people where they go, I like him. He just, so real. That's what people say. So real. I think what they mean by so real is they feel authentic. The fourth thing is that I think that if you're going to tell a story, you got to get coached on it. It is so incredibly important. You can't imagine. Remember, the leader sneezes and the stock market changes. Well, now you've got, 100 sneezes about ready to happen. And if you're going out there and you're not getting coached on what you're doing, you know how it sounds to you, but you have no idea how it's going to land on your audience. Doing it alone means you're picking out what you think is attractive or what you think is good, but you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for a group of lay people. And they have to be the ones to say, that's the story. That's the point. That's how that works. You won't do it alone very well.
And as you think of all these things that are really critical for a leader to do, what do you think they shouldn't do, or what do you think they most need to let go of?
I think there's so much to that, but the leaders, in a nutshell, when leaders become isolated, which is a typical thing, they get all the information filtered up to them. And by the time it gets to them, it's so darn softened that they don't hear the sharp edges. I think leaders have to place in front of them and surround themselves with people who tell them the truth, no matter what it is that is the truth, and that they don't become so upset at the person and people that are telling them the truth that they get rid of them. It's always interesting to me that they'll hire a consulting firm to tell them the truth. And then once they get it, they don't like the answers. So they get rid of the consulting firm. Well, that is such nonsense. If they're not willing to hear the truth, they're not going to be a great leader. They simply won't. So hearing the truth is incredibly important. The second thing is that if you don't have examples of what it is that you're trying to get us to do, if you don't have an example of that in story form, I don't think I'll get it. I don't know what you mean. What do you mean by simplify? Okay, is simplify meaning that 3,000 people's too many and that's not simple, so we're going to make it 500? So there's that discussion going on in people's heads. Is this a way to downsize, or are you really looking at freeing up time for us so we have more time to think, which is brain friendly? Give us an example, and that's what employees ask for all of the time, and that's where your stories lie. Show me an example of what you mean by XYZ. What do you mean by the digital industrial? What in the world does that mean, right? What's the internet of the internet? What in the heck does that mean? And so people become confused because we come up with beautiful little monikers and interesting kinds of ways to label things, but I still don't know what it means. And when we get to that, what does it mean? It means this. And then you give a story. So I think that if I were going to instruct a leader, I would say, don't believe all of your press, which means that you don't hear the bad news, and get people who you trust to tell you the truth, keep them around. And the second thing is your job is to give meaning to everything that is difficult in your company, that is critical to your company, and to understand that the vast majority of people don't have the time you do to think about it, nor do they have the background in which to make things add up. And if you do, I still might not understand the path you're taking me on. So giving people meaning to what it is that you're going to. I think if you, as a leader, give out a strategy and you can't tell a story behind every piece of it, then you probably haven't thought about it enough.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I just want to thank you so much for your time and your insights, and thanks for being part of Let Go and Lead.
It's been delightful to be here.
I'm amazed by Scott's ability to break down the complex machine that is our brain into digestible, actionable takeaways for leaders to know about communication. Let's recap a few key learnings about storytelling. First, leaders must share stories about their own experiences to humanize themselves and create authentic bonds. Having relative stories to share requires mining your life. Mining entails writing down what you remember from different ages, reflecting on why those memories were important, and understanding how those experiences changed the trajectory of your life. The lessons learned from this exercise can apply to current projects, programs, or teams you're leading. Second, before you start writing or speaking, determine your intention. In other words, what you want people to feel. As you prepare a story, remember these few simple rules. 1, keep the story to about 30 seconds and make sure it's relevant to the business point. And 2, don't make it all about you. You should not be the hero of your own story, Scott says. Instead, focus on pointing out the common struggles, stumbles, and triumphs that others can relate to. Third, when you deliver a story, always begin with who's in it. As a first step, create interest. Then, present an obstacle. As you describe the obstacle, point out the metamorphosis taking place within you or others in the story. Also, during your narration, be sure to pepper in imagery that brings your audience to the moment. And with coaching, you can relay your intent with data and stories and trigger the right neurotransmitters in a way that brings everyone to the same feeling at the same time. And when you achieve that, you are indeed in command of your audience. Lastly, Scott advises leaders to think twice about what he calls pronouncing the truth. That is, conveying the sense that the leader has all the answers. Rather, consider revealing to your team or audience that you're along on the journey with them. Share that while you may be a little farther ahead because of your role, you're on a mission to look at what's coming so you can bring back useful intelligence to them. I'd like to thank Scott once more for this most illuminating conversation and his parting words of wisdom. I found the entire discussion thought-provoking and eye-opening, and I know many of you listening did too. Until next time, thanks for joining us on Let Go and Lead.